Today's topic is burnout. This was a suggestion I got to make this video in a recent video's comments. And I got to say, just as a quick thing, I love when you guys leave me comments suggesting topics, because it's quite possible that I may not have thought about that topic, or it may just be the case that I was thinking about it at some point, but people suggesting it kind of bumps it up in terms of urgency. And like, oh yeah, I should make this. People are asking for it. So I really love when you guys do that. It definitely makes my job a lot easier. So with that said, this is a doozy of a topic. So let's get into it. Burnout is something that is kind of intimidating to talk about in a sense, because it's maybe intimidating is not quite the right word. Maybe just uncomfortable, because burnout in of itself is uncomfortable. Burnout is, I mean, firstly, it can affect people in lots of different ways. There can be lots of different symptoms and signs and stages, but equally it is depressing, and it does look like depression. You know, you may be feeling unmotivated, like you may not be enjoying your activities as you used to. You may feel like you don't really have care or have much of a purpose. You're unable, like it feels like your energy is just capped at like 50% or something. Like you just don't have the energy. Like all these things are very similar to what an experience of depression would be, but it's actually just different in certain distinct ways. And we're going to go into this because I think the best place to start with regards to this video is looking at how, you know, psychologists define burnout. And then what we'll do is as we kind of go through these definitions and the stages and symptoms, we will sort of circle back onto the esports relationship, I suppose, to how you might, you know, why you might be experiencing these types of feelings or symptoms, and what strategies we can employ to actually help you to deal with that. And then we'll sort of, you know, progress through and just keep kind of tying back in the context of esports, because I mean, there's not many people doing that sort of thing. So that's, you know, I think what makes my channel a bit different in certain respects. So let's get into it. Let's have a look at the definition of burnout. So WebMD, what is burnout? It happens to everyone at some point or another. Very true, very true. So burnout is a form of exhaustion caused by constantly feeling swamped. It happens when we experience too much emotional, physical, and mental fatigue for too long. Okay, so I think more so than the constantly feeling swamped, I think we want to pay attention to it happens when we experience too much emotional, physical, and mental fatigue for too long. Now, one of the reasons why I think this particular thing is of note is because, again, in the context of esports, most players are quite young, and because most players will be in their formative years, when you're young, you have a lot of energy. You know, you've got you're going through puberty. You've got all kinds of stuff going on in your body, and so it's already hard to be emotionally aware. But you're also, you know, being emotionally aware in a very complex environment where loads of changes are happening and lots of stuff's happening hormonally is also pretty crazy. And so it is no wonder that we don't really have, generally speaking, a good level of awareness on average for people that are in their formative years when it comes to knowing what the fuck's going on emotionally. That's just not a normal part of being a teenager and sort of growing up. And even, you know, going into your early 20s, it still takes time to figure out these things. So when we're experiencing too much emotional fatigue, if we don't really have much awareness in the first place, something like burnout can really creep up on you quite easily. And when we're, you know, talking about the physical and mental fatigue, the mental fatigue in particular is something that I think is equally hard to measure and to understand when you're a younger player, because you have a lot of energy, firstly, when you're younger. Like, you've got shitloads of energy, which is awesome. But at the same time, like, it's hard, I think, to understand when you're tired, really. Like, I remember being able to play easily for 14 hours, easily, and then just doing it again the next day. Now, I know a lot better these days that is extraordinarily fatiguing and tiring. And then the other thing too about that is that because we don't have any physical requirements really to play video games, and it is very mentally draining, and we can do it for such long periods of time, and we do because it's addicting, and because, you know, the games are just so good at making you want to play more, and we're competitive, and in the context of esports, we want to get better than everyone else, and lots of people are playing a lot. We feel like we also have to play a lot to keep up. So So yeah, there's just like certainly a cocktail of things that can certainly lead to burnout that are inherent in the esports universe, I would say, in terms of just the population being, you know, younger, and then the type of activity being extremely demanding mentally, and then couple that with also, as I mentioned, having more of a lack of awareness in general as to what's going on in your own sort of body and mind when you're younger. So in many cases, burnout is related to one's job. So yeah, with, you know, esports, trying to be a pro player, trying to be really, really sick at a game, very, very demanding. But burnout can also happen in other areas of your life and affect your health. Okay. So burnout can be caused by stress, but it's not the same. Stress results from too much mental and physical pressure and too many demands on your time and energy. Burnout is about too little. So this is a very interesting distinction. A very interesting distinction, because essentially, I think how we relate this back to esports, as it's saying, you know, too little emotion, motivation, or care. These can be a result of, let's say, you know, you're putting in massive amounts of energy into playing, and so if you're not getting the results that you're wanting to get, then you're not getting the emotional feedback, you're not getting the wins. A lot of players will be getting their emotional feedback just from winning, largely speaking. And so if you haven't sort of rewired your reward system at all, you're going to be in a spot where, yeah, you're kind of fucked if you're losing. You're kind of wrecked. It just feels shit all the time. You're not getting your rank up, you're not getting your rank ups. You're not achieving, you know, those very kind of external goals, you know, so it's going to feel pretty bad. And then also let's look at what too little emotion could mean from the perspective of deprivation of other things, opportunity cost. You're not out there spending a lot of time in person with your friends and family, and so you're not getting that support socially and emotionally, which is very different than, you know, hanging out on Discord. Because when you're in front of someone, obviously there is an energy exchange, there is a level of compassion and empathy that's possible because you're able to actually read the person's emotions, and they're able to read your emotions, and you're able to kind of, it is almost passively healthy and nurturing to be in positive social environments in person. So we are deprived from this because we're choosing to deprive ourselves from this because we want to play a lot, and we're playing on our PCs in our bedrooms most of the time. In terms of motivational care, these things can absolutely be massively affected, because you can get into like a huge kind of, there's a lot of different things that can go into this, but you know, in one sense, you could be in a sunk cost type of situation where you spent so much time trying to get good, you hit a barrier, and then you're just like, I'm putting in more time, but I'm putting in more time and getting less results. What's going to happen? Motivation will go down. Caring will therefore also go down, because why would your caring go down? Because you're trying to protect yourself. Because if you care less, it hurts less that you put in a lot of time at something and you still fucking suck. You know, that's painful. It's painful to not achieve what you feel like you should be achieving. It's painful to not achieve what your peers are achieving around you. It is painful to even like take a break, which is what you should do as the first thing you should ever do when you feel like you're experiencing burnout. The best thing, just immediately take a break, at least like a week off. Please do that as the default thing that you do before you do anything else. But yeah, so it makes sense that, you know, these are emotions that can happen as a result of not getting the results that we're looking for. And I typically see burnout the most, honestly, and I think it's often just referred to as a slump. Historically, people, I think, have used those terms almost interchangeably, because even though a slump is kind of different, I think what in most cases has happened is those players experiencing the slump are actually in a period of burnout. The thing is that the weird interaction between the burnout and the slump is the fact that, sadly, like, you know, they're probably, and in Counter-Strike, I think that this was not too uncommon, honestly, because of the level of demands on travel and just constantly playing tournaments, and just not having any time to recover. I think that this happened to a lot of players. And so what it looks like, and how people would talk about it on the desk and so on, would be that, oh, these people are in a slump. But in reality, I think they were just really burned out, and that resulted in them slumping in their performance. So it's kind of, I think that in of itself is an interesting topic, slump versus burnout. Almost a chicken and egg type of thing. Because the other reason is because burnout can also happen, as I mentioned, because you're not getting the results. So it can actually be much like a slump. It can be caused by the fact that you have barriers that you've run into as a player, which we're going to talk about too. Okay, so the condition isn't medically diagnosed, but burnout can affect your physical and mental health. Burnout keeps you from being productive. It makes you feel hopeless, cynical, and resentful. So, I mean, yeah, you can imagine why it would make you feel hopeless if your framework of training is like, shit, I got good by putting in loads of time. I would just put in more time, and then more time, the diminishing returns are there. / if there is a barrier you've hit a barrier, you will feel like you can't get past that barrier. And you will start to feel hopeless because it feels like no matter what you do, it doesn't have a result. It doesn't have a bearing on the result, which of course, what else are you left but to feel hopeless at that point, which will then make you feel cynical because it feels like nothing works. Like that is just going to put you into a cynical frame. And then resentful is more likely because it feels like no matter what you do, you can't get the change that you need. However, all these other people, your peers around you, are getting better, good offers for teams that maybe you're not getting, or, whatever it is. So you might start to just kind of under all of it, start to feel resentful. And if you're already in this negative, cynical frame, it's just, it's going to happen. So this can be this can impact how you exist as a human. Your behavior, your experience of your day-to-day life is now in a negative frame potentially, where you are more kind of tired and exhausted, and you feel like all the effort you're putting in is not worth anything. And so you're going to probably feel a bit worthless, and you're having to, again, care less because you're trying to protect yourself from not feeling worthless. So you're trying to do something in your mind to try to make it all feel okay. So that's very difficult. Okay, so burnout versus depression. Burnout can look like depression, as we talked about this already. But here's the key difference that they describe. A key difference is that you can ease burnout with rest or time off. However, depression, a medical illness, needs to be treated with therapy or medication. I think there's more to this. But anyways, that's not the topic of the video. Burnout is usually related to one aspect of your life, your job. And if we think again about like you're playing 14 hours a day, that's your job basically. If you're just playing 14 hours a day, it's either you're either hopelessly addicted, it's your job, or you are trying to make it your job. It's what I feel like. I don't know like what else it could be, right? Because if you're playing like extremely large amounts and the opportunity cost situation is I will only do this thing because it's that important to me, then and you're not doing other things to nurture or kind of look after your health, then it does feel like it's in that territory of those categories. So okay, and it is prolonged and stressful as well, for sure. So depression, on the other hand, affects every aspect of your life. So, okay, moving forward, types of burnout. So this should be a lot easier to kind of get some specific relationships between these types and the esports example. So overload burnout. This happens when you work harder and harder, becoming frantic in your pursuit of success. If you experience this, you may be willing to risk your health and personal life to feel successful. So we've already, this one is pretty pernicious and insidious, I would say. It's the idea of how sort of gradual it can sort of build up, that, this level of, becoming frantic can kind of build up over time. And then you kind of work harder and harder over time because you're trying to, achieve the results. It's all in the guise of the pursuit of success. And this is why it's kind of, pernicious or insidious, is because it feels like what you're doing is correct because you're trying to pursue success. So you're just trying to work harder and harder and harder and harder without realizing that if you keep working harder, if you don't have some level of recovery that makes sense, then you're going to be in a bad spot. Because we talked about the depletion element. What was that word? Depletion. I think it's towards the beginning. Yeah. So burnout makes you feel depleted and used up. So what if we just look at this? The language is actually quite important, because what is depletion? Depletion is the absence of something, which is like used up. Okay, these are the same things essentially. So what do you need to do if you feel depleted? Well, you've got to fill back up again. And how do you fill back up again? Well, you've got to recover. And you've got to, get that energy back in. whatever form it might take. So the depletions can be, multitudinal in the sense that it could be, for example, as we talked about, the motivation or the purpose, or all sorts of things. So you have to treat each thing as its own separate thing that requires its own recovery. So yeah, you need to recover your mental energy. So you need good sleep, exercise, diet is all very helpful, but you also should try to do something for the emotional aspect. You should also do something for how you understand, how you orient your purpose. How does this activity relate to your purpose in life and how you feel about your direction in life? And what plan can you make around that? And because by doing that, what you're actually instilling is the reasons to care. And you're also, by looking at the issue, you're also allowing yourself to be honest about what you're trying to really do. Because if you don't do that, what will happen invariably is you're not addressing the issue. So it's probably just going to get worse, and you're probably just going to cover it up more. And you're going to have these kind of like subconscious coping mechanisms happening, like caring less. We do not want to care less. We want to care the exact appropriate amount. And then we need to take the actions that are appropriate to that level of caring. And that is how you become fulfilled in terms of the purpose element. Because if let's say you're playing too much and it's going to hinder other things that you care about, that's not going to feel good, because you're not living to your values, and you're not in a position to get what you've set out to get from life. So we're going a little bit deeper here, but honestly, this is why this is a big topic, because this can be somewhat of an existential crisis for people. Because what will happen is, you'll probably get to this point where you get to the burnout. Like you'll get to this point and you'll be like, what the fuck just happened? Because you've just been doing the same thing for a while in terms of getting better, and you haven't experienced it before, but something has led you to this. You are doing stuff that is not correct, and it has led you to this unhealthy outcome. So you then have to it's like an injury. I always say this about injuries. Injuries make you smarter, because when you get injured and you can no longer do the activity that you wanted to do, like I've had multiple shoulder surgeries and stuff because of doing gymnastics and so on. Like that shit like fucked me up for multiple years at a time. And every time I got injured, I injured my back before as well in the gym. And so that took me out for like 2 years from doing the type of training I wanted to do. I was taken out for like 2 years because of the initial shoulder injury from the training I wanted to do. Same thing with the other shoulder injury. Like these injuries take a long time to recover from. And during that time, it's like, man, this is so shit. I cannot let this happen again. So it becomes a very educational process, because you're so humbled by what happened. You are sort of having to eat the shit sandwich, and you're having to like look at the reality of, how did this happen? How did I allow this to happen? Because this is taking me away from essentially what my goals are in my life. So, okay, so we talked about overload burnout a little bit. So some other comments on this one. We don't want to, if we're experiencing burnout, we don't obviously want to be working harder and harder. Much like I said previously, you need to have in your process like a good recovery, and you need to have in your process a pretty well balanced training regimen. And it really is for this reason, so that you work smarter and not harder, essentially. Because if you're always in a position to be well recovered, you're going to be able to more consistently perform too. Okay, so the under-challenged burnout. This happens when you feel underappreciated and bored. Maybe your job doesn't provide learning opportunities or have room for professional growth. If you feel under-challenged, you may distance yourself, become cynical, and avoid responsibilities. Okay, so this one is a lot. I mean, I think I have seen people definitely experience this, who don't want to take that sort of ambitious leap and don't want to necessarily cause maybe rifts or fissures in their social circles, where they may be in a team and they actually should probably be in a better team, but they aren't willing to kind of essentially like piss off people around them, and so they end up being stuck in just a team that is where they feel under challenged, and they're not really being utilized. And what they may not realize is, because they're making a choice so that there is no social cost for them personally, they are, it is the opportunity cost whereby they are not fulfilling themselves. Because if you're experiencing this, it means that you are stuck in a situation that is, you've stuck yourself there where you are under challenged, and you need to be honest about how ambitious you are with your goals. and you need to try and figure out, like, go back to this exercise I was talking about all the way up here, where we're talking about the whole like purpose and caring. You got to figure out what it is that you actually want and be super honest about it, and then make sure that your actions sort of align with where you're at. And if you're under challenged, leave. Find an environment that excites you and energizes you because it's challenging you in the ways that is going to be congruent to your values. That is will then make you feel the most fulfilled in the pursuit of that value. Okay, so neglect burnout. This happens when you feel helpless. If things aren't going right, you may believe you're incompetent or unable to keep up with your responsibilities. Such burnout can be closely connected to imposter syndrome, a psychological pattern in which you doubt your abilities, talents, or accomplishments. Well, imposter syndrome, I'm definitely quite familiar with that one. I think many people are, to be honest. It seems quite common. This one is kind of similar, because ultimately the helplessness thing is never true. You can always do something. And so we talked previously about the frame of mind when we were up here. We talked about the frame of mind, that if you become hopeless because your training leads you into a place that is hopeless, because that can happen, right? Like if you walk into a room with no, this is a terrible analogy, I can tell. Like sometimes I just do this analogy off the cuff, and sometimes it's good, but more often than not it kind of sucks. But if you just walk into a room and there's like no exit points, and then the door behind you, it gets shut and locked, that's going to feel hopeless because you've picked the wrong fucking room. If you pick the right room that has all of these open doors and opportunities and so on and so forth, you're going to feel like you have a place to go. So the thing is that you have to, it's you that puts yourself in a position with your actions to be full of hope or to be hopeless. So if you ever feel hopeless, it is a place that you have put yourself. And that this is the thing, right? This is the fundamental difference. It's about more of a, what's the opposite of like victim thinking? Whatever the opposite, however you call that, the opposite of victim thinking. It's like, taking charge, agency. I suppose the understanding of and acknowledgement of your own ability to have full agency over your life and your decisions. If you act from that frame, you will not feel hopeless. If you act from the victim frame, because this is the thing, right? You will arrive here at hopelessness because you can't always know what's the product of your processes, and the processes might be shit, and you might end up being in a place where you feel hopeless because of the reasons we talked about before. I put in all of this effort, all of my systems and processes are not really working for me, and it seems like nothing I'm doing is working. So at that point you have two options. You either take agency and take ownership, or you do the victim thing and just like try to do the cope thing where you care less and so on and so forth. So it is a fork in the road where you have to make that decision yourself. And this is why awareness is pretty key, because if you choose the more victim mindset, you will then be cynical because you'll feel like the world is doing this to you and you can't win. There's no way for you to win. And then you'll feel resentful because other people around you are getting the stuff that you want. And so you will be more likely to look at them and their successes negatively, as opposed to the other way. If you have agency and you see people that are doing things that are, impressive, you will be inspired and you'll be looking to use that these emotions like of envy, like in a much more healthy way, where you'll be like, oh shit, that's amazing. I wish I could do that. You know what? I'm going to try to figure out how to do that. I'm inspired by this person. How did they do this? I'm going to figure it out. That's the difference. And if you're in the negative, the negative envy is trying to tear those people down. That's the negative version of that. So you often have like these, this is why, again, as I mentioned, awareness is important, because you've got to be able to be in control of your destiny by, figuring out what your behavior is actually kind of looking like at any given time. So next one, neglect burnout. This happens when you feel helpless. If things aren't going right, you may believe you're incompetent or unable to keep up with your responsibilities. Oh, right. We just did this one. My bad. We just literally talked about this. We talked about agency versus victim mindsets. Okay, so habitual burnout, the most serious phase of burnout. Habitual burnout happens when your physical and mental fatigue is chronic. You feel sad and your behavior changes. Sometimes you can cross over into depression and suicidal thoughts. It's crucial to seek help at this stage. I think this is definitely, a place where a lot of, I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of Counter-Strike players didn't find themselves in this place, especially in the earlier years where the travel was absolutely ridiculous. The conditions were a lot worse as well. And it's just constant. It's just constant. So that would certainly qualify as habitual, because the physical mental fatigue was definitely chronic. Because not only was their mental fatigue chronic in terms of the level of effort that they were putting in, like physically speaking, having to travel constantly, having to be constantly jet lagged, having to be constantly in different hotels and environments. None of this, like the food is going to be inconsistent and shitty. All of these things are horrendous for your ability to stay in a good place. So I really appreciate how tough it has been for like the CS players in particular, in those earlier years. I don't know how it is in the last few years, but I think it's a bit better. Anyway, here are the stages of burnout. So we're kind of coming to a close of the video, like somewhat soon as we get through this list. Okay, so burnout develops over time. Oh, and by the way, at the end, I'll also sort of recap in the sense of, okay, what are ways we can do, what are things we can do to avoid this in terms of just how we think about this, all of this, to kind of just do a little recap. Okay, so stages of burnout. Burnout develops over time, and it's hard to realize it at first. Yeah, absolutely. Two psychologists, Gail North and Herbert Freudenberger, came up with 12 stages of burnout. So these are, I suppose, incremental stages. So an urgent need to prove yourself. This is where it starts. An urgent need to prove yourself. Obviously, we've all felt this. We've all felt this. Like sometimes we feel this in ranked when people are giving us shit. Like if you're like bottom fragging in ranked, I know that lots of people like have a feeling like this that can happen, where they really feel like they need to kind of prove themselves, or they're letting everybody down, and that's a pretty bad place to find yourself in mentally, to have that pressure on you. In this earliest phase of burnout, you want to do well to the point of perfectionism for fear of not fulfilling demands. Oh, all of these, there's so many bad words here in terms of performance. The perfectionism, firstly, like to the point of perfection, is just obviously not possible. Firstly, so it's a standard that you can't possibly reach. And it's not easy. You can't really define this super well. Also, fear of not fulfilling demands, also horrendous. We're looking at an external source of pressure here, where there is that demand coming onto us. And sometimes this demand is placed on us explicitly by somebody else. Sometimes we do it to ourselves, much like the example I just gave, where sometimes you're in the ranked game and you are super aware of the amount of kills you have. I haven't experienced this probably in like 20 years because I've been playing for so long and all of my experience. But I see this when I drop into like random ranked games. I see people that have this behavior where they get like really self-conscious and like no one will say anything on the comms, but they'll start like either shit talking themselves, which is obviously terrible, or they'll try to start doing that kind of like they'll say something to kind of cope. Whatever it is, it's cope with the situation. So yeah, definitely not great. Working harder. You feel the need to do everything yourself and complete tasks as soon as possible. Okay, this is actually really interesting in a way because this actually reminds me of the situation that you can find yourself in game where, in a team game, people have roles. And sometimes your teammates will just not be doing their roles. And so then you'll be trying to do like multiple roles at once. And it's not possible to really effectively do that. And so what ends up happening is you're trying to take control of too much. And therefore it's not even just too much. It's like there's things you're trying to take control of, which you cannot have control of. And it's because you want the outcome of the win so badly that you feel like you have to do that. But it's all bad. All of that is bad because not only are you getting yourself into situations where you're trying to control things you can't, that's always bad. You're also getting yourself into situations where you're overextended. You're also getting yourself into situations where you are not getting good quality reps. You're going to have to throw out some of the stuff that you may have that was disciplined about how you play. Like this is just all bad. So this is like the working harder in the sense of working harder, but not smarter, essentially. You're trying to overcompensate. It may be even a better way to put all of this. Neglecting your needs. You think the stress of work or activities such as caregiving is normal. You neglect your social life and look down on others who pursue one. You begin to make small mistakes. Okay, so this is neglecting your needs. So we talked about this already. Just the idea that there is an opportunity cost. If you spend a huge amount of time playing, you're giving up other things in its place. And so, if you're giving up a lot of social interactions and various other things like exercise or just getting outside, things that could kind of, refill the tank, as it were. If we look back at the beginning definition, talking about, too little of something, depletion, well, we are expending lots of energy, and we're also not doing things that will help us to recover that lost energy. So this is like another part of these stages, or what can build into the burnout. More interpersonal conflicts. So this is an inevitability if you start to become more negative. So we talked about the frame that you can fall into. And so if you become, more negative in your frame and more resentful and cynical, you're going to be more likely to be a more irritable and more of a dickhead to people around you. Because part of the thing about being happy and less stressed is that you are much more patient and things roll off your back much more easily. And generally, you're very easy. You're easier going in those emotional states. But if you are kind of stressed, you got that cortisol in your system. You're already unhappy with yourself, and there's like things internally that just don't feel good. You will use your interpersonal relationships as an outlet for those things, and you'll act out. You'll be a dick to people, like, because you're hurting inside, and you haven't dealt with it. And then, like, as we have pointed out here as well, this is kind of a big one. The lack of correct or like good sleep will also make all of those things a lot worse. Your ability to regulate your mood and to be happy in these things is highly correlated with good quality sleep. And so if you're chronically underslept or having issues with sleep, this is one of the first things you need to try to fix, because it will create problems. Equally, if you don't sleep well and your goal is to become better, sleep is essential in the learning process, in actually converting on your reps effectively. Because when you're actually going through your sleep, it's the most critical part of the learning process. What your brain does is it especially with stuff that's technique related, is it puts it all on repeat. Now, I think this was like, this information I'm talking about is from like a rat study. So now that I think about it, I'm gonna have to like recheck this. But the idea was that our brains basically replay everything that we did, like just an enormously large amount of times, just on repeat. And I think with the rat study, it was like they had the rats going through mazes, and they were tracking how well they were understanding how to go through mazes, and they understood that basically that they had a lot of additional brain activity that was specific to sort of a mental repetition of that task in their sleep, which would help them to learn. And it kind of speaks to that experience where, have you ever been doing a bunch of technique work for days on end, and then one day you wake up and you're just better? I think that speaks to that experience. So I definitely need to go back and look at that study to see if that's even good now. But sleep plus equals good learning, I think that's probably still a thing. So revision of values, you see things differently and begin to seem insensitive to others around you. Friends and family become secondary to your goals. I think more so here is just that you don't have as much bandwidth for other shit. I think that's part of the problem. That's what emotional availability is all about. It's about having, because if you're very stressed, you're going to be less available because you're more depleted. You have less bandwidth, you have less energy to go around. So, you have to kind of prioritize the essential systems. And then, as I think this quite rightly says, friends and family do become secondary in those cases. Denial, the bitterness and cynicism creep in, and you begin to cut yourself off from others, becoming impatient, intolerant, and angry. Your performance suffers and you feel physical discomfort. So we're starting to get into pretty rough territory here, honestly, with some of these things. The bitterness and cynicism. I think we all know players and people that we've come across where we've seen this, where they're just like, they're in denial. Like it's actually quite interesting, because when I'm in ranked, I see a lot of behavior, right? And I'm not trying to psychoanalyze anyone, but it's just so common. Some of the things that you see, like the most hurt people tend to be the ones that are the ones trying to be the biggest dickheads to people. So it's actually quite funny when you think of it in that way, when you see people that are just really just massive assholes, because it's very likely that they're just really hurt. And so if you just see them as that a very hurt person, it really takes away all of that like bite that anything that they're saying actually has, and it allows you to be a lot more patient with them, because it's easier to understand that they're not really attacking you. they're just acting out because they are very unhappy for some reason or other, or because, you know, it could be the case that they feel very insecure about their performance. That's a fairly common one, that people feel like very insecure about their performance. Because if you think about like people that play Valorant a lot, or Counter-Strike a lot, or whatever game, if you're spending like all your time playing this game and you're not good, what does that say about you? Right? If that's the only thing you care about and you suck, what does that say about you? That's a pretty hard, that's pretty hard reality to face, because that means that you suck, man. Like you put a lot of investment into something, you got absolutely, you know, nothing in return. So because of that reason, you know, it can be fairly common that people will then develop some protective mechanisms with their ego and so on, or to protect that sense of their themselves, and their self-worth, their self-esteem. So it's an interesting one. Anyway, going on to the next one, withdrawal. So dealing with others feels like a burden. You get angry if someone criticizes you, and you may feel disoriented or helpless. You may try to, I don't know why I'm doing like a funny voice. You may try to self-medicate with alcohol. You may try to self-medicate. Jesus. This is already very, maybe I'm doing it because I'm like, this is getting kind of serious now. I'm feeling kind of like need some comic relief. But yeah, the withdrawal, dealing with others feels like a burden. So again, this is more about the depletion. This is that cumulative depletion. Like you just don't have the bandwidth you don't have the energy. And because you don't have the energy, and because you are hurting, something is wrong, and you feel hopeless, and you have less energy to fix it, you get angry if someone criticizes you, because you already feel shit about yourself. You're already hard on yourself. You're already feeling like, you know, whatever energy you have isn't enough to fix the problem. And you feel disoriented because of that. Like where do you go? And you don't know what to do. Like you're helpless. You may try to self-medicate with alcohol or illegal substances. So because you're experiencing a lot of pain and your capacity to deal with the pain is diminished, and because your ability to actually, you know, be tolerable in social environments is going down, I'm learning here. Of course, you're going to try to find some way to take the edge off the pain that you're experiencing here. Behavioral changes. Apathy sets in and nothing matters. Jesus. You avoid additional responsibilities. Yeah. Right. Okay. So I'm just like kind of thinking back to moments where I've experienced some of these things in my life, and just kind of like, I just kind of like did the 1,000-yard stare for a second. Okay. Depersonalization. You lose the sense of identity, seeing yourself only as a vessel through which work and responsibilities are completed. Your life feels meaningless, and you begin to neglect I feel like we've already been neglecting our health. So I don't know if begin is the correct word. I think like you more severely neglect your health. I mean, hey, we already started doing illegal substances up here, so I don't know. I feel like we've already begun to neglect our health. Although I suppose the legality of a substance is not necessarily correlative to its impact on your health. But anyway, so losing a sense of identity, this makes a lot of sense, right? So let's go all the way back up here, because what is the sense of identity? What does that even mean? Your sense of identity is reflected in not just, I'm going to go back to this like word, because at this point you guys kind of know why I've kind of gone back to it multiple times, but your sense of identity is not only just reflected by your values, but it is in the effectual pursuit of those values. It's your ability to translate those values, to manifest those values into the world and to get something tangible back. So it's you know, it's going, and if you have a value for, you know, learning about, you know, astrophysics, it's about, you know, reading books on astrophysics. It's about taking some courses. It's about looking at, you know, like setting up a telescope in your room. You know, if the example is, you know, health and fitness, and you actually have a value for health and fitness, but you are, for whatever reason, unable to pursue that value. Maybe it's your own. I don't like to use the word laziness as much as I used to, because I actually feel like laziness is actually, there is a lot behind laziness, and maybe that's a topic for another video. But I actually don't believe that laziness is generally laziness, actually. I think it's a lot of other things. But anyway, the point is that for whatever reason you're not pursuing that value, it's going to make you more unhappy. If you pursue the value of the health and fitness and your astrophysics and you're playing your video games and all these types of things, you're doing the things you care about, and you're achieving the things that you care, you know, the goals within those things that you've set for yourself, you are sort of kind of essentially experiencing a congruency. You're experiencing a sense of synchronicity with who you are in this world. And if you don't do that, then of course you're going to lose your sense of identity. Because if you're not pursuing your values, and if your values are, defining who you are as a person, because it's the outward expression into the world of yourself, then of course you'll lose your sense of identity. And with the loss of that sense of identity, you're also going to be, struggling a lot more to be able to actually create good processes and to recover, because it's just kind of a hard hole to get out of. Seeing yourself only as the vessel through which work and responsibilities are completed, your life feels meaningless, and you begin to neglect. Again, like I already talked about that. Feeling empty, exhaustion, anxiety, and panic sets in. Despair. You may have feelings of self-hatred or depression, coupled with suicidal thoughts. Total burnout. So I actually feel like basically like all of these things are like a stage, like experienced kind of together. All of these things are here, to be honest. So yeah, this is the more extreme, part of the end of the spectrum, and and this is the thing, right? Again, we're talking about something that for a lot of esports players, if we're talking about burnout within the context of esports, of course it can happen. Like what is being done can be very physically demanding, is extremely mentally demanding, is there's a lot of pressure on succeeding. And the ability to get opportunities is few and far between. So it feels like when you get an opportunity, you really have to, perform an urgent need to prove yourself. You really have to, work hard. And everything is so demanding. So yeah, of course, neglecting your needs is probably going to happen. Interpersonal conflicts, well, we can see that these stages kind of play out because there's too much demand, and you start to not get recovered enough in many respects. Okay, so we've looked at the stages, and here's an additional list. There's actually more here than I thought, so let's go over these things too. Unmanageable workloads, unfair treatment at work, confusing work responsibilities, lack of communication or support, immense deadline pressure, too much work, not enough time to rest, a feeling that work or life is out of your control. I think this is a really big one. Because if you're able to keep things feeling in your control, then you're probably going to be fine, because you can always change things. That's like the difference. If stuff feels out of your control, like, is it really? Probably not, but it would feel the feeling that it is. It can easily shift you into that kind of, the world is happening to me rather than I am happening to the world type of mentality, which is a very important distinction to be aware of. Feeling unrecognized or unrewarded, work responsibilities that feel too demanding, boring or routine work, or chaotic or high stress work, taking on too much without asking for help, lack of sleep, few supportive or meaningful relationships, personality traits such as perfectionism, pessimism, and a need for control. Signs of burnout: feeling tired or exhausted. Okay, hang on. Many burnout symptoms can feel like symptoms of stress, but there are 3 ways to differentiate them. Feeling tired or exhausted, no enthusiasm and feelings of negativity towards your job, inability to perform your job. To be honest, to me, these just sound like symptoms of depression. Burnout can have many symptoms that often can be confused with stress or advanced depression. These are the signs to look for if you or someone close to you is experiencing burnout. So exhaustion, alienation from activities, reduced performance. This is all just I feel like, yeah, it's depression, mental burnout symptoms. You may feel self-doubt, helplessness, defeat. So these are really big, because we understand how much the mental game is absolutely key to your performance in the video game. So the fact that words like self-doubt, helplessness, defeat, and failure, not good words in that context. You may feel increasingly that you're on your own, lose your sense of purpose, feel increasingly cynical, dissatisfied, and incapable. So even though this is a pretty long video at this point, I actually feel like it's quite valuable to go over this extensively, because one of the reasons why I tend to recommend Jared Tendler's work so much is because the most valuable part of Jared Tendler's work is how he actually defines everything. Because in his ability to define everything, it then equips you to be able to be this was already defined to me, so now I can see It's like I have vision now. I can see what's happening. But whereas before, I just saw a collection of ideas without having like a good way to kind of think about them or to understand like where one idea ends and the other begins. But with the ability through those the linguistics that Jared Hendler uses, he's got his language for this is how you categorize these different things, and this is what they are, this is what they mean, and then you read the book and you're equipped with that. That's really powerful because it would take you a very long time to ever figure that out by yourself. Okay, burnout treatment. Talk with your supervisor. Yep. Obviously, I laugh because obviously in the context of esports, there's no esports supervisor. Obviously, like if you are in a pro team, then yes, this means like talk to your. I mean, this depends on the team structure, but talking to your coach or your GM, definitely. Sleep, we talked about this. We already emphasized how that's essentially the most important thing of all. Relaxing activities, we also talked about this, doing things that help you to combat the depletion. So yoga, meditation, Tai Chi. So these are great ways to release stress. I mean, you've got the physical aspects here of the yoga and Tai Chi, even though it's not, Tai Chi is not particularly physically demanding. Yoga can be, or it cannot be depending on what you're doing, but it does get you in your body. So, and that's what meditation also serves to do as well. Is it all these things kind of shift your your awareness, your conscious focus into your body, and allows you to kind of process stress very, very well. So obviously there's been lots of studies at this point that meditation and similar activities are very beneficial to deal with stress. I'll also throw out there Andrew Huberman's non-sleep deep rest, which is a type of meditation as well with body scanning. That I actually can advise you guys to do if you're having like a long session of playing. If you do that like in the middle of it, I think it takes like 10 to 20 minutes. Then that will be a great mental refresh for you. Be mindful, find support. So, yeah, definitely a lot of like good information here with regards to it. But I think it's time to sort of bring it back into sort of the esports examples, because I feel like answer some of these fairly well. So a lot of this can be solved by awareness. That's the first thing. That is one of the reasons why we went through this whole thing, is we want to understand what are all the things that are in play, and that allows us by reading about them to be more aware of them. And then the next thing that we need to do after that awareness is we need to have a good process, because with that knowledge, with that awareness, we need to understand, does our process kind of take some of this stuff in mind? So are we in a position where our practice is not too rigorous? Are we in a position where we have breaks where we need it? Are we, and you can kind of design that in your process. So like if you have, for example, your various warm-ups and you're going into your playing session, it doesn't hurt to stick, a 5-10 minute break even, in certain places, because one of the things we learned is we're talking about depletion. Okay, I'll keep coming back to that word. So we need to find ways to refill the tank and to recover. And on top of that, we talked about also the purpose element of this. The fact that, one of the issues with the burnout is that you can get into a place of hopelessness where you feel like your efforts don't really do anything. And that can have a really big impact on your sense of identity. And that can really exacerbate things like imposter syndrome. And so if we stay goal-oriented and we have good processes behind what we're focused on working on, we get really lost in the process there. And that's really helpful because you'll be able to consistently see, you're essentially keeping your mind to task. There's that old saying, the devil makes work for idle hands. It's very similar in the sense that if your only response to getting better is just playing more, you're actually not putting yourself in a situation where you can get lost in the sauce in a way that's beneficial. You're actually in a spot where you're trying to do one thing, and within that thing, you've got no solutions. So if just the extra effort doesn't work, you're kind of screwed. And we talked about depletion. If you're thinking that playing more is going to be the solution, you're just going to get more depleted over time. And what will happen? Worse habits will appear over time, because you won't be able to have the mental energy to keep a check. I talked to Vanity about this briefly on the podcast. Like this is one of the biggest problems with playing too much, is that you will make more mistakes, and because you've got less energy, you won't even spot them. and you'll probably reinforce them. That becomes a very real danger. So if you want to effectively improve, figure out what your minimum effective dose of training is. I actually think 4 to 5 hours can be easily enough. I think, in a game like Valorant, getting extra reps is important because there's so many variables. Just exposing your brain to all of those various patterns that can exist can be quite impactful in terms of getting better. But generally speaking, you can make significant progress by staying disciplined, which you cannot do if you're playing too much, because you just don't have the energy to keep yourself in check. You will make mistakes and you will get too loose in spots where you shouldn't get loose. Because the part of the process, part of the reason why discipline is important is because you have to get the consistent reps of the thing you want to be your default. If you are not disciplined, you will not be consistent with that thing that you want to be consistent, and you'll be inconsistent. And then you have no right to complain about being an inconsistent player at that point, because you're not training consistently. So that's like one thing. The other thing too is that, having these processes which have like these natural breaks, and you have like this whole system, actually feels really good, because you're creating a series of things that you're doing that, like, from the beginning to the end of your training, it feels like you're actively working on stuff and actively actually getting like positive feedbacks. So if you go and do your technique work, you're working on your technique work. So it's like maybe like a skill or two that you're doing in aim labs, and you're like, I'm going to work on my click timing. And so you're kind of working on your click timing, and you're going to be seeing like, I'm not getting I didn't like beat my score today, but like I can see my average is going up a little bit, and I can feel that it's like feeling a bit better. And I really focus on making sure that I get good click timing, and I execute the technique in this way. Then once you've done it, you're like, okay, cool. I've taken care of this thing. Awesome. I know that just by doing this one thing, because I've put it in my training for a reason, this is going to help me. Okay, cool. Now I go to my my generalized warm up. I want to focus a little bit more on like these things today. Okay, so boom, boom, boom. Focus on my movement. Focus on certain patterns of shooting with certain weapons. I've done my like 3 or 4 DMs, whatever I wanted to do. Cool. Okay, now I'm going to go and do my emotional warm up. Okay, maybe I'll do a team deathmatch now. Obviously, I'm using Valorant examples because that's most of my viewer base at the moment. Okay, getting into the team deathmatch, I'm getting neon, I'm running it down, I'm like having some fun, got my music playing, kind of like setting myself up for like what I want to achieve in the practice. Cool. Okay, go take a break, drink some water, like walk around for a few minutes. You got these kind of like natural breaks. You go into your ranked game, you're kind of executing, and you're always kind of like on task essentially. And because you're doing so in such a fashion that it's like things are fairly well defined, the feedback is also fairly well defined too. And so things become much easier to manage, and you get the natural recovery. You get the diversity in the practice that allows you to it allows your brain to just do different things, which is also helpful in being less drained. You also feel more engaged with what you're doing, which is also important. And then obviously you're going to have more time for other shit in your life too, because you don't need to play 14 hours a day. You don't 8 hours a day is fine. And you can still have a life and do some other things. That's like a normal 9 to 5 type of situation in that sense, in terms of the hours that you're working. So having a process, having the awareness, making sure that you stay in the mindset of having full agency, taking, like, if you run into issues in terms of your training, it's in your power to go and solve them. If you can't solve a particular problem, find something else to solve. It's so similar to, I remember, it was the case in a math class or whatever. They'd be like, okay, if you're stuck on a problem, go to another one, and then come back to it. And sometimes that in of itself actually does work. Like, that actually helps, because sometimes just staying on one problem for too long and obsessing over it, there's a cost to doing that. So firstly, what is the cost of that extra effort? Well, firstly, it's an opportunity cost. You're not solving and practicing another problem that at that point in time you can solve. So okay, well, there's the various arguments here, because if you just stay on that one, then maybe with some extra effort you can solve it. The thing is that that's not going anywhere, and you're going to get a positive feedback from going to solve something you can solve, and that's going to give you a bit of a break from that task, because the longer you're struggling with something, the more dysphoric it becomes, like the shittier it feels, because the longer it takes you to do it, the probably the more you'll feel like you're incapable, because you just can't figure it out. And so by, having these various things interspersed that is going to be feeling productive, giving you good feedbacks is really good. And creating as many good feedbacks or opportunities for that as you can in your process is really good. We already talked about, various ways you can do that. And equally, I talked about the other day having a clip reviewing system as part of your VOD review at the end of the day. have a button you can press that clips the rounds. If you have like a, and then you have like a bunch of rounds you can potentially review at the end of the day. Boom, there's your entire process, and you're already more professional than a lot of professional players, and you will make faster progress. And also, like, you need to be having fun. None of this will work if you can't have fun. One of the qualities of this whole burnout situation is that you're not having fun anymore, and you're trying to solve problems with work, and you're not trying to solve problems by working smarter. So there is a bunch of stuff to kind of bear in mind. But as I said, also make sure that you take a break if you experience burnout. You cannot work your way through it. What you need to do is you need to take a break. You need to understand where you think the problems are in your gameplay, and then create a process to go and execute. Because what you need to make sure you do is you need to switch into the mindset of, I have full agency, I can solve the problems. And then you need to create a process that can just get you started. And you need wins at that point. You need to give yourself some wins. So there's lots of ways you can do that. So, by just, we already talked about it, just by having a new process entirely, like change everything if you want. Like even if you had one before that, like just change everything. Just change stuff and give yourself some wins. Give yourself some things to learn. Give yourself some ways to find fun in the game again. This might be my last note on all of this. In Counter-Strike, I remember seeing it very commonly that a bunch of players who were slumping, this happened to a bunch of players who were slumping, and even some that weren't necessarily, but would feel like they're very disappointed in their performances. They would take really big breaks, or they would disappear for a while, and then they would come back and they'd be like, I just had to learn how to have fun with the game again. I just like so much of the performance at the top level then became players talking about having fun in the game again, like finding fun in the game again. And it's because what happens is they ran into either some kind of a burnout situation, or they ran into a situation where they're just too stressed and they're just not enjoying the game anymore. And part of that, again, is it comes back to this kind of value fulfillment thing, where if it's the case that, like, your value is to be a really good player, but you've really given yourself no reasonable way to believe you can do that, and you're just mindlessly grinding all the time, well, you're not actually pursuing your value of being the best player. You're just kind of floating around. So you need to recenter yourself on the values that you have, be honest with it, and then go take actions that are congruent to that thing. And if you're able to do that, you'll probably start having fun again. Because generally speaking, honestly, just speaking from my own experiences, mostly with this one, if you're like I get super fucking energized with stuff that I'm interested in, because the stuff that I'm interested in is a value for me. And so if I get to talk about it, if I get to do it, if I get to like experience it and learn about it, I feel energized. It gives me energy. I have fun. I think creatively. I start to like try to draw connections. My mind starts firing off. All of those things I just described is the opposite of your frame of mind if you're in burnout. If you want to be a really good player, you need to be able to maintain the right frames of mind. And the fun thing, it sounds kind of pedestrian in a way. It's like, oh, you gotta have fun with the video game, to perform well. Like, that sounds like a kind of a weird statement, a kind of a basic statement to make. But ultimately, it's actually quite important in the sense that if you're in a mode where you're having fun, just like I mentioned, you are the most mentally energized. You're the most relaxed, because having fun, laughing, it relaxes you. That type of thing, it makes you feel kind of at ease. It is, working in opposite to the forces that create burnout. Like, we're talking about stress and cortisol and, just like all of these different, physiological things that are happening that make you tighten up, and your mind closes up as a result with it. And so by having fun, you're actually in the best place for performance, to think creatively, to be loose, to be focused, to be confident, to make crazy moves that where your intuition is just dialed to another level. These things are really truly only possible if you're having fun and because you're super engaged. So sometimes it's just a case of figuring out what is the states that what are the states that are experienced in the most optimal version. And then if you just look at it's like the opposite of those things is usually like where you don't want to be, obviously. So you can kind of try to, try to extrapolate, how do I get to those optimal things, and by that notion, how do I avoid the suboptimal states of being as well? Okay, so I've been kind of going for bang on an hour essentially on this topic. I hope it was interesting in some respect. This is the first time I've taken more of a, I suppose, really mental health type of, I've done a type of mental health type of video and related it to esports. But I feel like there's some really cool topics that we covered through this by just looking at burnout as a concept. And I think we boiled it down to, I think, a good few principles that will be helpful for people to use and to be aware of. So with that said, my work here is done for now. Let me know if you have any questions. And as always, if you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe and share it with your mates. And then, finally, as well, I'll say that I have a Patreon that is, at this point, is sort of designed mostly for the podcast in a sense, but it's a good way to support me in the stuff that I'm making. As I'm not really doing much streaming on Twitch, I'm really trying to build the YouTube. It's, I think, really the best way, other than YouTube ad revenue at this point in time, for me to sort of monetize my efforts with the channel. So any support there is always appreciated, and I will see you guys on the next one. Cheers.